Hi everyone, welcome to lecture number 15, the second lecture on labor market equilibrium. In our last lecture, labor market equilibrium we discussed in detail in a competitive environment. We discussed about the properties of a single competitive labor market and the implications of the neoclassical model, how the efficiency is achieved through the equilibrium in a single competitive market. Further, we discussed about competitive equilibrium across labor markets. We have seen that through an invisible hand, workers and the firms that search selfishly for better opportunities accomplish a goal that no one in the economy had in mind, that an efficient allocation of the resources. So we have seen that both workers and the firms, they try to maximize their self interest. However, at a greater interest in the society, resources are allocated more efficiently. So, in this lecture, we are going to discuss about the impact of payroll taxes on the labor market equilibrium. Now, point here is that when there is some kind of intervention is given in the form of taxes or subsidy, how it is going to affect the equilibrium in the competitive labor market, how the efficient allocation of resources are going to be distorted. That will be the subject matter for the discussion in this lecture. When we talk about payroll taxes, these taxes can be imposed on either on the employer or it can be imposed on the employees. And these kind of interventions, they have significant impact on labor market outcomes. When it comes to the employment level and the impact of these taxes on the employment levels in the economy, higher payroll taxes can increase the cost of labor for the employers, which may lead to a decrease in the overall employment level in the economy. Firms may be less willing to hire new workers or may even reduce their workforce to offset this increase in the tax burden. So, the employment level is going to be reduced in the economy because of this imposition of the payroll taxes. Further, payroll taxes are going to affect the wages and the benefits which the workers they are getting. Payroll taxes can also affect wages and benefits. When the employers face high payroll taxes, they may be less inclined to increase wages or provide additional benefit to the employees, as they are already observing the increased cost. Further, payroll taxes affects the labor market participation. Payroll taxes can influence individuals' decision to participate in the labor market. Higher taxes can reduce the incentive for the individuals to work, especially for low wage workers, as the disposable income is going to decrease. Further, payroll taxes can impact labor market mobility by affecting workers' willingness to switch jobs or relocate across regions. Higher taxes may discourage workers from seeking new opportunities or moving to new regions with better job opportunities. So, if they perceive that the net gain to be lower due to increase in the tax reduction, then the mobility in the labor market is going to be affected. Further, the payroll taxes may increase the informal employment in the economy. Like in the regions where the payroll taxes are high, there may be a tendency for the employer and employees to engage in informal employment arrangements just to avoid these tax obligations. So, this can lead to a larger informal economy, which may have implications for tax revenue collection and labor market regulations. Further, payroll taxes can also affect the productivity of the economy. Payroll taxes can influence productivity levels in the labor market. If the employers face higher taxes, they may seek to offset these costs by investing in less in training, technology, and other productivity enhancing measures. At an aggregate, payroll taxes may affect the economic growth of the country. So, excessive payroll taxes can hinder the economic growth by dampening labor market dynamics. If firms face high taxes on employment, they may be less inclined to expand operation or invest new ventures which can constrain overall economic activity. However, the payroll taxes can also affect the income inequality, income distribution of the economy. Payroll taxes can also contribute to the income inequality as lower income workers may bear a large burden relative to their income compared to the high income earners. So, this can worsen the disparities in the disposable income and access to the resources, which may lead to income inequality in the economy. Overall, the impact of payroll taxes on labor market outcomes depends on various factors, including the level of taxation, the structure of the tax system, and broader economic conditions. Therefore, balancing the need for revenue generation with consideration for labor market efficiency and equity is essential for policymakers when designing these payroll tax policies. So, let us try to understand what happens to wage and employment when the government axes a payroll tax on the employers through our standard economic model of demand and supply. So, if you look at this graph, on the x axis we have taken employment, on the y axis we have taken wage. So, the supply curve is upward sloping, which means the substitution effect dominates the income effect, and the initial demand curve is D0, which is downward sloping and governed by the marginal revenue of the workers. And the interaction of this demand and supply decides the equilibrium in the labor market, in a competitive labor market at point A. So, E0 amount of workers are going to employed at W0 wage rate. So, the equilibrium wage rate and equilibrium employment in the economy is W0 and E0 before imposition of any taxes. Here we have considered that the payroll tax is imposed on the farms. Now, when there is an imposition of taxes on the farm side, the employer side, the demand curve is going to shift. So, when we talk about demand curve in the labor market, each point on the demand curve gives the number of workers that employers wish to hire at a particular wage rate, which means employers are willing to hire E0 workers if each worker costs W0 . So, to simplify the analysis, consider a simple form of payroll tax. For example, the firm will pay a tax of $1 for every employee hours it hires. In other words, if the wage is $10 an hour, the total cost of hiring an hour of labor will be $11, which means $10 goes to the worker and $1 goes to the government. Because the employers are only willing to pay a total of W0 to hire E0 workers, the imposition of payroll tax implies that employers are now only willing to pay a wage rate which is W0 minus 1 to the workers in order to hire E0 workers. So, the payroll taxes access on the employers therefore leads to a downward parallel shift in the labor demand curve. as you can see in this graph, now the demand curve has shifted from D0 to D1 because of this imposition of this $1 tax on the farm. So, the new demand curve reflects the ways that exist between the total amount of that the employers must pay to hire a worker and the amount that the workers actually receive from the employer. Now, point here is that if the farm wants to hire or employ to E0 amount of worker, they want that cost should be at W0, which means they want that the wage rate to be paid to the worker should be W0 minus 1, so that they can go with this W0 wage rate. Now, as a result, the demand curve has shifted downwards. Now, the new equilibrium has been achieved with S supply function and D1 the demand function at point B. Now, at point B, the farms are willing to hire E1 amount of worker at W1 wage rate. Now, this is W1 is the wage rate which the workers are going to receive, but the actual cost to hire each one amount of labor for the farm is W1 plus 1, because this is the amount of tax the farm is going to pay if they are going to hire E1 amount of worker. Now, if you compare earlier, the farm was paying W0 amount of wage rate and the workers were getting W0 amount of wage rate. Now, after imposition of $1 tax, the farm is hiring E1 amount of employment and paying them W1 amount of wage rate. Now, the wage rate has declined from the actual wage which the workers they receive, it has declined from W0 to W1. The actual employment in the economy has declined from E0 to E1, but to hire this E1 amount of labor, the actual cost is going to bear by the farm is W1 plus 1. So, this is 1 rupee, this is the amount of $1 of tax on each workers hiring by the farm. So, if you look at this the tax burden, now who is going to bear how much of tax burden? Even though the legislation clearly states that employers must pay the payroll tax, the labor market shifts part of this tax to the workers. After all, the cost of hiring the workers rises at the same time that the wage received by the workers decline. So, E1 workers are going to hire at a higher cost, but actually they are receiving lower. So, in a sense, therefore, the farms and the workers they share the cost of this payroll tax. The political debate over this payroll tax often makes it appear that the workers are better off even the payroll tax is assessed on the farm rather than on the worker. In short, there seems to be an implicit assumption that most of the workers would rather see that the payroll tax imposed on the farm, whereas most farms they would rather see the payroll tax should be imposed on the workers. However, it turns out that this assumption represents a complete misunderstanding of how a competitive labor market works. It does not matter whether the tax is imposed on workers or on the farm. The impact of this tax on the wage and employment is same regardless of how the legislation is written. Suppose for instance that this $1 tax on every hour of work had been assessed on the workers rather than on the employers. So, what would be the resulting outcome in the labor market? Now, if this $1 tax is imposed on the workers, then the supply curve is going to shift up. Let us try to understand how this works. On the x axis we have taken employment, on the y axis we have taken wage, and before imposition of tax, the economy is at equilibrium at point A with S0 supply function and D0 demand function, employing E0 amount of workers at W0 wage rate. Now, $1 of tax is imposed on the worker side. So, the payroll tax imposed on the workers creates a wedge between the amount of that workers must receive from their employer if they are to offer their services in the labor market and the amount that the workers get to take home. So, if E0 amounts of workers has to be employed at W0 wage rate, then the actual wage they want to have from their employer is that W0 plus 1, because this $1 of tax they are going to pay. So, to hire E0 amount of workers, the firm has to have the cost of W0 plus 1, out of which W0 is the actual wage the workers are going to get, the actual cost is going to have for the firm is W0 plus 1. So, as a result, the supply curve has shifted from S0 to S1, and you can see the new equilibrium now shifted from point A to point B, and at this new equilibrium point, the firms are going to hire E1 amount of workers at W1 wage rate. The firm now paying each worker's W1 wage rate, but the workers has to pay $1 of tax for every hours of work. Now, actual wage, the take home wage for the worker is W1 minus 1. So, if you look at this, when there was no tax, the wage rate was W0. Now, imposition of $1 of tax, the wage has increased to W1. Earlier, the firm used to pay W0 amount of wage and the workers used to receive W1 amount of wage. Now, the firm is paying W1 wage rate and the workers are receiving W1 minus 1, the net wage the workers are receiving W1 minus 1. Now, this $1 of tax, a part of that is going to share by the workers, a part of that is going to share by the employer. Now, earlier the workers used to get W0, now they are getting W1 minus 1. So, this is the part the workers are going to take the burden. Now, earlier the firms they used to pay W0 amount of wage rate, now they are paying W1. So, a part of that tax burden the firm is going to bear. So, whether the tax is imposed on workers or it is being imposed on the employers, the tax burden is going to share by both workers and the employers. So, in both the cases the wage rate is going to increase and the employment is going to decrease. The payroll tax assessed on the workers therefore leads to the same type of change in the labor market outcomes as the payroll tax assessed on the firms. Both taxes reduce the take home pay of the workers, increase the cost of an hour of labor to the firm and reduce the employment. In fact, you can see that $1 payroll tax will have exactly the same numerical effect on the wage and employment regardless of who bears the legal responsibility of paying for it, whether it is on the farm or it is on the workers. If you look at the graph, it shows the exact uh, amount of tax burden bear by both workers and the farms, whether it is the tax burden is on the farm side or it is on the worker side. So, you can see when the tax is imposed, 1 rupee of tax is imposed on the farm, then the demand curve has shifted from D0 to D1. Actually, the worker is getting this much of wage rate, the farm is hiring E1 amount of worker, and hiring each E1 amount of worker, the farm has to pay $1 tax. So, the actual cost for the farm is W1, and a part of that is beared by the farm and a part of that tax burden is beared by the workers. Now, if the tax is imposed on the worker, it is going to increase the shift the supply function from S0 to S1. Now, at this point, the worker is getting W1 amount of wage rate and the farm is paying W1 amount of wage rate, but the worker is paying $1 tax. So, actual take home wage rate is W1 minus 1, and if you see and compare with this W0, a part of this tax burden is beared by this worker and a part of that tax burden is beared by the farm. So, the point here is that on which side of the tax it is, the tax burden is going to bear by both workers and the farm. In this case, it is exactly coming out to be the same. The degree of tax burden depends on the elasticity of demand and supply functions. So, the true incidence of the payroll tax, that is who pays what, has little to do with the way the tax law is written or the way the tax is collected. In the end, the true incidence of tax is determined by the way the competitive market operates. So, even though a payroll tax assessed on the farm shifts down the demand curve, it has the same labor market impact as the revenue equivalent payroll tax assessed on the workers, which shifts the supply curve. Now, the point is that when will the payroll tax be shifted completely to the workers? A payroll tax assessed on the farm is shifted completely to the workers when the supply curve is perfectly inelastic. Now, you can see if the supply curve is perfectly inelastic, in this sense, the E0 amount of labor is going to be employed irrespective of whatever the wage rate is. So, the supply function is perfectly inelastic. So, 1 rupee of tax burden imposed on the farm is going to be completely shift to the worker. Now, the demand curve shifts from D0 to D1. As a result, you can see the wage rate earlier it was W0, now it is the wage rate is W0 minus 1. So, the entire tax burden is now shifted to the workers just by reducing the wage rate exactly by the amount of tax. So, the burden of payroll taxes being shifted to the workers refers to the concept that even though employers are legally responsible for paying payroll taxes, the economic burden of these taxes may ultimately fall on the employees in the form of low wages or to reduce the job opportunities. So, when employer face high payroll tax, they may respond by adjusting their behavior in various ways, such as reducing the wage, cutting back the hiring, or passing the sum of the tax burden to the employees through lower wages or reduced benefits. So, this shifting of this tax burden can occur because the employers may view the cost as a whole, including both wage and payroll taxes, when making the decision about the compensation. Additionally, economists argue that in a competitive market where the supply and demand for labor determines the wage, and employers may adjust the wage downward to offset this higher cost of labor caused by these payroll taxes. As a result, employees may end up bearing at least a part of the burden of these taxes through lower wages or reduced employment opportunities. However, the extent to which the burden of payroll tax is shifted to the workers can vary depending on the various factors, as I said, including the elasticity of labor demand and supply, the structure of the labor market, and the government policies. So, in our next lecture, we are going to discuss the impact of payroll taxes on economic efficiency and the welfare impacts at the aggregate economy. Thank you.